Thank you, Deputy Speaker. Deputy Speaker, I rise to speak on and support the Australian Organ and Tissues Donation and Transplantation Authority Amendment Bill of 2023. And while the member for Dunkley is still in the House, I just commend the comments she made, particularly in relation to us perhaps exploring an opt-out rather than opt-in system for transplants and donations. Deputy Speaker, I will speak first of all about the bill briefly, and then I want to particularly commend organ donation and particularly registering for organ donation. I am registered. My husband is registered. We've had the conversation with our children. I've had the conversation with my parents as well. It is particularly important that as many Australians as possible do register for this. Deputy Speaker, the purpose of the bill, the stated purpose of the bill, is to amend the Australian Organ and Tissue Donation and Transplantation Authority Act of 2008 to broaden disclosure of information provisions. And I do note that the Minister's second reading speech said that there are both provisions in state and territory legislation and the 2008 Act that prohibit the sharing of some information related to deceased donors and recipients for the purposes of community awareness and other educational activities by the Organ and Tissue Authority and Donate Life agencies. And the bill is intended to amend the 2008 Act to allow the Organ and Tissue Authority, Donate Life agencies, grant recipients and authorised family members to publish, disseminate or disclose information about deceased donors for the purposes of the authority's community awareness, educational or commemorative activities. There's a list of authorised family members that the bill provides will now be included, but it is stated that the amendments are not intended to facilitate direct contact between donor families and organ and tissue recipients, and governments intend to protect the right of both donor families and transplant recipients to remain anonymous where they wish to do so. So, to the extent that I think the clear intent of the legislation is to encourage and facilitate organ donation and transplants, Deputy Speaker, I support and commend this bill. And I'll just read out some statistics. I know that many in this place have spoken of these statistics already, but and this is from the Donate Life website. Organ, eye and tissue donations save lives, restore health and improves the quality of life for thousands of Australians each year. However, only 2% of people who die in hospitals each year can be considered for organ donation. One organ donor can save the lives of up to 7 people and help many more through eye and tissue donation. And we have, in 2022, there were 1,477 deceased eye donors and 276 deceased tissue donors. The numbers were slightly down in that year, and corneal transplant recipients, which helps to restore sight and vision for many people. There were 2,340 in that year, which was a slight decrease. And in that regard, a very close friend of my mother's, Deputy Speaker, had a corneal transplant back in, I think it was about the mid-80s, Sandra Jowett, and she was, it has made a very big difference to her life. She was a teacher, so in terms of her being able to read and carry on with her teaching profession. 54% of families said yes to donation in 2022, Deputy Speaker. And this is when they're asked in a hospital setting. Often that is the case and usually it is the case that families are asked when a family member has passed away. And there are very specific circumstances when a person dies in a hospital, in an ICU or ED ward, because organs need to be functioning well to be considered for transplantation. And only around 2% of Australians who die in hospitals meet the criteria required to be an organ donor. And with those numbers so low, that is why it is so important that we have as many Australians as possible who can register now to consent to become a donor. So there are currently, Deputy Speaker, around 1,800 Australians waitlisted for a transplant and around 14,000 additional people on dialysis, and some of whom may need a kidney transplant. So again, the need for transplants and donations is growing and is urgent. So while the majority of Australians seem to support organ and tissue donation, and that's appreciated, only around 1 in 3, or 36% of Australians, are registered to be a donor. It is not difficult to register. It is quite a simple process on the Donate Life website, and it is, as I said, I commend any members of this place who have not already registered to please consider doing so and to have that conversation with their families. And in that regard, I just want to speak briefly, Deputy Speaker, about a good friend of mine. He's the Mayor of Liverpool, Ned Manoon, and in 2014 he donated his kidney for his then 2-year-old son, Solomon. Solomon is now 11 years of age and is a typical healthy 11-year-old, I'm glad to report. Ned and his wife Tina went through a very difficult time when Solomon was born. He was very, very ill, and they went through the process of ascertaining whether or not there were suitable donors, and it was Ned in the end who was the best match. And he said at the time that he would do anything he could, and he would never give up on his little boy, which was an exact quote that he gave. At the time when Solomon received his transplant, he hadn't ever really enjoyed a bath or a swim. He had to be very careful even drinking water. It was an agonising process. And so for that little boy, who is now, as I said, a robust 11-year-old, turning 12 in September of this year, that 8-hour operation was literally life-saving and life-changing. So for that reason, and I know that there are many others in my electorate who have undergone this process, and for that reason I do again commend this legislation to the extent that it will help to promote organ donation and to help save lives, and again particularly the life of a little 2-year-old boy as he then was. So, Deputy Speaker, I will conclude. The bill is supported by the Liberal Party, and the Liberal Party has a proud tradition of supporting organ donation. And to that extent, I support this bill and commend it to the House. Thank you.
Thank the member for Hughes.